Female hiker vanished in the Appalachians. 3 years later, she was found tied to a bed in a bunker. "She didn't run away. You just stopped looking," Maya screamed as the lead investigator closed Elena's file after only 4 days. The injustice of being labeled a voluntary runaway left Elena rotting in a soundproofed hole while the world moved on. 3 years later, a developer found a hidden vent pipe breathing out the scent of vanilla and bleach. Inside, Elena was shackled to a bolted bed, terrified of the toxic sky. But as the hatch opened, she realized the birds were still singing. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. The Appalachian Trail is 5 million steps of beauty, but for Elena Vance, the journey ended at step 10,000. Elena was 26, a woman who climbed mountains to clear her head of a cluttered city life. In May 2020, she parked her car at the Neels Gap trailhead, adjusted her pack, and vanished into the green canopy of the Georgia wilderness. She was supposed to call her sister Maya from the top of Blood Mountain. That call never came. Instead, a massive spring storm tore through the ridge, turning the trails into rivers of mud and blinding gray fog. When the rangers found her tent shredded and empty 2 days later, the search began. But the injustice started almost immediately. The lead investigator, a man who had seen too many tourists get lost, looked at Elena's social media and saw a recent breakup. He didn't see a woman in danger. He saw a girl having a moment. He told Maya that Elena probably just walked off the trail to clear her head and decided to hitchhike home without telling anyone. He called it a voluntary disappearance. Because of that label, the bloodhounds were pulled back after only 4 days. They treated Elena like a runaway instead of a victim, leaving her gear to rot in an evidence locker while her sister screamed into a void of bureaucracy. For 3 years, Elena Vance was a cold case, a name on a faded flyer pinned to a trailhead kiosk, bleached white by the sun. But the mountains don't just take people, they hide them. In the summer of 2023, a land developer named Gary was surveying a forgotten 60-acre plot on the backside of the ridge, far from the hiking trails. He was walking through a collapsed barn when his boot caught on something metallic. It was a rusted PVC pipe sticking 6 inches out of the red clay, covered by a piece of fine mesh. When Gary leaned down, he didn't smell damp earth or rot. He smelled cheap vanilla candles and bleach. He kicked the pipe, and from deep underground, a muffled, rhythmic thumping started. Someone was hitting a pipe with a piece of metal. Gary didn't call the developer's office. He called 911. When the deputies arrived, they found a heavy wooden pallet covered in hay. Underneath was a steel hatch, bolted from the outside with a heavy industrial padlock. As they cut the lock, the air that escaped the hole was cold and stale. They descended a ladder into a space that looked like a survivalist's dream and a human being's nightmare. It was a 10 by 10 concrete bunker, meticulously clean, smelling of industrial cleaner. And there, sitting on a bed bolted to the floor, was Elena Vance. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't running for the ladder. She was huddled in the corner of the mattress, her ankles bound by a soft nylon rope that allowed her to move only to the small kitchenette and back. When the flashlight hit her face, she didn't look relieved. She looked terrified. She held a hand over her mouth and whispered, "Is the sky still on fire?" The injustice of the last 3 years began to settle in the room like lead. Elena wasn't lost. She had been rescued from the storm in 2020 by a man named Silas, a local recluse who lived on the ridge. He hadn't snatched her at knife point. He had found her shivering and hypothermic and brought her to his sanctuary. But once she was underground, the lies began. Silas told her the storm was part of a larger cataclysm, a nuclear event that had scorched the atmosphere. He showed her fake radio broadcasts he'd pre-recorded and played through the bunker's speakers. He kept her captive not just with rope, but with the belief that stepping outside meant certain death. The investigation into Silas's sanctuary turned up details that were more chilling than any ghost story told around a mountain campfire. You see, Silas didn't keep Elena in a cage of iron. He kept her in a cage of information. In the months after her recovery, the forensic team discovered a small, high-end radio transmitter hidden in a crawlspace behind the bunker's kitchenette. Silas had spent years meticulously recording hours of news bulletins on his computer, layering in sounds of air raid sirens, crackling static, and scripted reports of a global chemical war that had turned the Appalachian air into an invisible poison. Every morning at 8 a.m., Elena would wake up to the sound of these broadcasts, reinforcing the lie that the world above her was a scorched, silent wasteland. The human texture of her captivity was a series of small, heartbreaking rituals. Elena had survived by counting. She counted the number of vanilla candles Silas brought her, 72 a year. She counted the steps from the bed to the sink, exactly 5. She even counted the heartbeat of Silas when he would sit on the edge of her bed to tell her stories about the old world before the fire. He was a master of the slow burn deception. Occasionally, he would come down wearing a heavy yellow hazmat suit, huffing through a respirator, and bring her a rare treat from the surface, like a dirty, half-crushed candy bar, claiming he had risked his life in the toxic clouds to get it for her. This created a twisted sense of gratitude. She began to view her kidnapper as her only lifeline in a dead world. Bystanders in the nearest town, a tiny mountain community called Suches, had plenty to say once the news broke. Silas? He was just the quiet guy who sold firewood, one neighbor told the local news. The gossip was thick with a sense of communal guilt. People remembered seeing Silas buying massive quantities of bleach and canned meat at the general store, but in a town full of preppers and survivalists, no one blinked an eye. He was just another guy, ready for the end of the world. No one realized he had already started his own private apocalypse, 6 feet under his barn. The momentum of the story shifts when you look at the evidence of Elena's breaking point. About 18 months into her captivity, she tried to dig out. The investigators found a section of the concrete wall behind her bed where the paint was slightly different. Elena had used a metal spoon to chip away at the mortar for 3 weeks. But Silas found the spoon. He didn't hit her. He didn't scream. He simply turned off the ventilation fan for 6 hours and played a recording of poisonous wind howling through the pipes. He told her that her digging had cracked the seal and they were both going to die. The psychological trauma of that day was so profound that Elena never touched the walls again. She became her own jailer. The curiosity loop that haunts this act is the fatal mistake. Silas had become arrogant. He began to believe his own myth, that he was a savior. On a Tuesday in July, he went up to the surface to check his perimeter traps, leaving the steel hatch shut, but, for the first time in 3 years, he forgot to turn the heavy locking wheel. He thought Elena was too terrified of the toxic air to even look at the ladder. Inside the bunker, Elena heard the silence. No radio broadcast, no hum of the ventilation fan, just the sound of a bird chirping near the intake pipe, a sound Silas had told her was extinct. That one sound, a tiny rhythmic trill of a mountain sparrow, cracked the 3-year lie. Elena stood up, her legs shaking from years of limited movement. She reached for the ladder, her fingers brushing the cold steel. Every muscle in her body screamed that the air would burn her lungs, but the bird kept singing. She climbed, step by step, counting to herself. She reached the hatch. She pushed. To her horror, it moved. As the lid cracked open, a sliver of blinding natural Georgia sunlight sliced through the darkness. It didn't smell like chemicals. It smelled like damp pine and mountain rain. But as she pulled herself out into the dirt of the barn, she saw Silas's shadow stretching across the floor. He was standing in the doorway, his back to her, looking out at the woods. The tension in that barn was a physical cord about to snap. Elena didn't run for the woods. She knew she couldn't outrun him. She reached for a heavy iron pry bar leaning against the tractor, her breath hitching in her throat. She had one chance to prove the world hadn't ended, and it started with the man who had stolen hers. The air in the barn didn't burn. That was the first thing Elena realized as she stood behind Silas, clutching the iron pry bar. It was cool, sweet, and filled with the scent of pine needles and old hay. Silas didn't hear her. He was staring out at the woods, perhaps mourning the dead world he had spent 3 years pretending to mourn. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was a ghost of itself, cracked from years of whispering in the dark. "You lied," she said. Silas turned, and for a split second, the predator was replaced by a pathetic, aging man. He didn't fight. He didn't even lunge for her. He looked at the sunlight hitting Elena's face and simply sat down in the dirt, covering his eyes. He knew his world, the only one where he was a hero, was over. When the police tactical team arrived, they didn't just arrest Silas, they dismantled a house of horrors. Behind a false wall in the bunker's kitchenette, investigators found the archives. It was a collection of 24 journals, each labeled with a different name and a different year, dating back to 1998. The injustice of Elena's case was only the final chapter in a 25-year history of a man who hunted the Appalachian Trail, looking for souls to save from a world he hated. Silas hadn't just taken Elena, he had perfected the art of the psychological cage over decades. The revelation of his past victims sent shockwaves through the Appalachian community. The quiet wood seller was suddenly the face of one of the most prolific serial kidnappers in Georgia history. But for Elena, the rescue was only the beginning of a different kind of struggle. The legacy of the bunker didn't disappear when the handcuffs clicked shut. The aftermath was a slow, agonizing return to a reality she no longer trusted. When Elena was finally brought home to her sister, the reunion wasn't like the ones in the movies. Elena wouldn't go inside the house. She stood on the lawn, staring at the sky, convinced that if she stepped under a roof, the poison would return. Psychologically, Elena Vance remained a prisoner of the ridge. Even months later, she struggled with environmental agoraphobia. She would only eat food that came from a can, and she refused to sleep in a bed that wasn't bolted to the floor. The sound of a bird chirping, the very sound that saved her, now triggered intense panic attacks, reminding her of the moment the lie broke. The final twist came during Silas's trial. It was revealed that he had actually been a failed park ranger applicant in the late 90s. He had been rejected for psychological instability. He hadn't just built a bunker, he had built the version of the Park Service he thought should exist, one where he had total control over who lived and who stayed protected in the dark. Today, the barn on the ridge is gone, demolished by the county to prevent it from becoming a destination for macabre tourists. The hole has been filled with concrete and buried under 6 feet of red clay. But if you talk to the hikers near Blood Mountain, they'll tell you that the air feels different near that 60-acre plot. They say the birds don't sing in the trees surrounding the old Silas farm. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the pines, it sounds like a metal spoon chipping away at a concrete wall, forever trying to find a way out. If the silence of the Appalachian trails now feels a little too heavy, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We dive deep into the files the authorities closed too soon, and the mysteries that hide just out of sight. Tell us in the comments, do you believe Silas was a lone predator, or are there more sanctuaries hidden in the ridges that we haven't found yet? Don't let the trail go cold. Stay tuned, and let's uncover the next secret together. Would you like me to help you brainstorm some title ideas or descriptions to go along with this story for a video or blog post?